with that, let's move over to today's chapter, which we talked a little bit about already. And that is it's Sansa 3, which it is a shorter chapter, but again, there's one of these ones where you get the two different point of views. Obviously not in the book, but we do have the show to compare it to. Excuse me. So Sansa is dressing in the gown Cersei Lannister had made for her, thinking to herself what it would be like to marry Willis Tyrell. However, her daydreams are shattered when the queen reveals that she is to marry Tyrion that afternoon. Sansa does her duty, realizing there is no way out. Tyrion apologizes to her, saying that it was his Lord Father Tywin's wish to see them wed. During the ceremony and the royal sept, Sansa does not bend to allow Tyrion to put the cloak over his shoulders, causing embarrassment for the dwarf. At the feast in the small hall, Sir Garland Tyrell comforts Sansa, saying that Tyrion will make a good husband. He is a bigger man than he seems when the time comes to have them bedded. Tyrion demands that there will be no bedding. Then he threatens Joffrey to keep him from making the tense moment worse. In bed that night, Tyrion realizes that Sansa is petrified at the thought of losing her maidenhood to him, and he tells her that he will not touch her unless she wants him to. So this is, it's one of these chapters, and really Sansa, it's like if you go back to a Game of Thrones, Sansa doesn't have as many chapters as Arya. I'm pretty sure, I might be mistaken on that, but it's one of the but it's like Sansa appears in a lot of those chapters, and this is the same thing. Like Sansa will appear in a lot of Tyrion chapters. So we've talked about like the reading order where sometimes you have to go through it, and this is one of these ones with Tyrion. If you just read Tyrion's point of view straight through, you would miss out on this chapter. But in a way, this is almost, to me, this feels like more of a Tyrion chapter than Sansa's. And you just have to look at that decision by George to say, I want to tell this story through Sansa's eyes, which if you have to pick one of the two, I think like Tyrion is still, you still get a lot of his motives and a lot of his story is carried through well. So I think Sansa is the correct, like it obviously was the better choice. I'm sure he thought about that when he was writing this. It's
Yeah.
like, do I want this to be Sansa or Tyrion?
Yeah, and the purpose of this chapter for both of our characters, and one of them being a POV and the other being the bystander from a writing perspective, I think this chapter does a lot to further my belief that Sansa, in many ways, is seeing the deterioration of her expectations of what it is to be a noble lady, to have marriage between two powerful houses. What is obviously the Hound is a great example of her figuring out that true knights might not actually be knights, and the true knights that are given to her or shown to her are actually despicable, the ones who are ripping her dress and hitting her and all these other terrible things. And Joffrey, the handsome, charming prince, turns out to be a monster. And now she's being married to what everyone in the realm considers to be a monster, and that's Tyrion, with his scarred face, being a dwarf. I think this is just a furthering of this POV from her. And it's important for her because it's going to shape how she sees people and the world later on in the series, which we start to see in the future books, and how she starts to learn how to play the Game of Thrones, but also looking at people past their appearances or their expected character.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really a turning point. This is much more of a turning point for Sansa than Tyrion. I think she never really comes out and says it, but I think if as you're reading it, you can begin to see also that she realizes that the Tyrells played her
a bit.
And
yeah,
she doesn't say it, and she doesn't even really think it. She does notice that they're not there when she's looking for them. But you can almost feel it in her mind as you're reading this chapter that she's like, beginning to see. I think this is another one of those like, oh, the Game of Thrones beginning to see it, is that she's nothing more than a pawn in this chapter.
Yeah, even though there's furthering of the decline of her views of the world as far as like what they should be in a medieval fantasy world. I've always said that she's the stand-in for the fantasy reader that had read like all the samey stuff from Tolkien on, and then coming into this where things are very different. I think that this is also showcasing her character growth, and that she's able to actually recognize what the Tyrells may or may not be doing underneath. And then she's being influenced by Dantos as well. Do you feel like the Tyrells really are just Lannisters with flowers?
Yes.
You do?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
I feel like there's always been a very cynical view of the Tyrells, and without a doubt, I mean, they're a royal house in Westeros, so they're nuanced at to say the least. But I've never felt that they were awful, and maybe
Really?
that's
Oh,
because they're helping the characters that I like at this moment, and maybe that's also one of Sansa's realizations that people are going to use you, and if it
uh,
suits your means of safety, then maybe it's worth it.
I actually think the Tyrells are worse than the Lannisters.
Now hold the phone.
No, I mean,
Joffrey Baratheon exists. Okay, come
no, I
on.
mean, okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, you have Joffrey, but like, if you look at the Tyrells are even the Tyrells to me are even more like they're just more slimy, backstabbing than even like Baelish. I mean, for starters, Marjorie or Tyrell marries 3 kings.
Hey,
Okay, I mean,
sometimes you got to figure it out. All right.
I mean, literally, I mean, they're flip flopping and jumping ship every opportunity,
Mhm.
that they get. Right? They say, "Hey, we're gonna go with Renly." Okay, now we're gonna marry Joffrey. Okay, now we're gonna do this. And what they do here with Sansa, I mean, literally, they're like, "Hey, we'll marry you to Willis." First, they could have married her to Loras. They could have
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, we'll marry you to Loras Tyrell." Think about how no, we'll marry you to Willis, and we're gonna talk him up, even though the whole deal is that he's, um, you know, I guess he's better than Tyrion, but here, I mean, Cersei, when Cersei is talking about this, when she's talking about, oh, you're going to marry that gargoyle. Now, Cersei is talking about Tyrion, but Sansa doesn't know she's marrying Tyrion yet. So she thinks she's still marrying Willis. And she says, like, oh, what gargoyle? Sansa did not understand. Did she mean Willis? How could she know? Right.
Hmm.
So she still thinks that she's going to be marrying somebody that the realm would look down on. Um, but she would get to go to Highgarden, and they sell it as, oh, well, yeah, but you'll be in Highgarden and you'll be a queen and all that stuff. And all they were doing was getting information on Joffrey and how terrible he is. That's all they
Yeah.
wanted.
We also got to look at status changes, right? Sansa in a Game of Thrones is something that can be bartered with, right? Like the
Right.
Starks can barter her off for a marriage and make strong alliances and whatnot. The game has changed. The Starks have, without a doubt, plummeted in favor, even worse so after A Storm of Swords. So Sansa now is the key to Winterfell. So the Tyrells are offering a marriage and they're providing her. I mean, it is better than Joffrey as far as like being treated, right?
Mhm.
But they're really after Winterfell. I do think that that's the case. This is a marriage that Ned Stark would have absolutely declined had he still been alive, and everything was
100%.
back to what it was. So from that perspective, you're right. It is slimy. They're kind of preying on her for being in this terrible situation. They are providing her some form of. I guess that's my question. Do you feel like there's any goodness to their motivations at all? Like, do you think that this is something where they really don't want Sansa to be hurt, or do you think it's purely a power grab and they want to?
They're only in it for themselves.
So you don't
I
think
guess,
they cared about her at all?
yeah, and I guess for me, the way I view it is, would you prefer to have somebody like like the Lannisters, who's pretty obvious to like everyone in the realm, are like kind of, I guess, evil, if you want to, look at it that way. Um, or do you want that like slimy kind of, do you want that like slimy car salesman who's trying to be your best friend and is pretending to be nice when they're really not? Whereas the Lannisters, like, you look at a lot of the moves Tywin makes, I mean, he's just like very firm in what he's doing. I mean, it's pretty obvious what his intentions are, but at least he's like, they're much more direct about it.
Our apologies to all used car salesmen who listen to the podcast. We didn't
I said slimy, I mean, I'm not saying they all are. I'm saying there are certainly some.
That's why I buy them new, Matt. That's why I buy them new.
Yeah, even buying new, sometimes it's a freaking hassle.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question. I think in current day Sansa, like where we're reading, I think I would take the Tyrells, man, after being abused and knowing that Joffrey still wants you as his plaything and not feeling safe. Your dad was beheaded there. I think I would take the Tyrells, but I do know what you mean for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem is that we're talking like we're comparing. You include Joffrey as part of that, right? As
Yeah.
part of the Lannister grab, and
Mhm.
Joffrey is just like one ultra crazy person, but and he's
I
also
mean,
younger.
Cersei's not nice, right? She's pretty
No,
horrible.
no, Cersei's not nice, but sort of she does give Sansa like truths. Like she will give her hard truths and say this is how it is. Like when the Battle of Blackwater is going on, she's straight up with her like we might get raided and this is what we're gonna have to do. Like, because if you don't, this is what's gonna happen. So I mean, I mean, she's obviously she comes across as like the evil fairy, or the evil god, the
Yeah,
evil mother,
right.
Disney, whatever. That's that imagery. Evil stepmother, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Whereas the Tyrells may not inherently be like evil, but they're still just in it for their own intentions, and they're gonna do whatever they do. I mean, think about this for the fact the Tyrells are going to manipulate a young girl who's basically a hostage into doing whatever they want to get their own benefit. So maybe they're no different, but I guess I view the Lannisters, I think more of like, I mean, Jamie, you look at Jamie, Tyrion, and Tywin. I mean, they're all just much more direct about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something about knowing what you're getting. I think
Right.
just in this situation with what Sansa's experience, she's still better off being used by the Tyrells than the
Right.
Lannisters. I don't think she'll have to fear for her safety. I think that's the
Yeah.
big thing.
I think yes, we look at the fact that the Lannisters killed Ned Stark. But at the same time, if you look at it from their perspective, Cersei does offer Ned an opportunity not to blow, like to go out and tell everyone this whole thing.
Yeah, and then they offered him the
I mean,
black, and then he did what they asked and ruined his own honor and lied and made himself look
well,
like
I
a
mean,
traitor, and then they
had
chopped his head off.
when Ned and Cersei have that first meeting in the thing, she offers him an out. I mean,
Yeah.
you should not pursue this any further. Is basically what she says.
Yeah, I guess there's a piece of me that, you know, they're direct and they say this is the way it is, but I'm always a big person of like pushing back about is this really the way it needs to be? Like, can't we change things? And I
Yeah, I
feel
mean,
like
don't get me
Lannisters
wrong,
are
they're both
reinforcements.
yeah, they're both
Bad.
evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both bad in their own right. I view I guess the Lannisters have a little more honor amongst thieves, I guess is the way I'm trying
What
to
honor? They murder. They do the red wedding.
they well uh Olenna Tyrell does the purple wedding, and she uses Sansa as a scapegoat.
Well, I don't know if she uses Sansa as a scapegoat. That's a good question. Do you really feel that way? Because I feel like it was very unfortunate timing that Sansa left during that. Like Olenna
No, because
Tyrell didn't know she was
it's the
leaving.
poison in the necklace.
Yeah, I guess she did. Maybe she did set up Sansa a bit, huh?
Yeah, because if they find out the poison and then they do an if Sansa doesn't leave, then she would be the scapegoat, and then Tyrion's the one who gets blamed, so they're gonna view her too.
Hmm. Yeah, but then they lose their
Everybody's
key to Winterfell, though. You know
they don't need it
why not?
because because then they get rid of Joffrey, and then they say, okay, we'll have Marjorie marry Tommen. Who cares about Winterfell? They've got the crown.
Well, Winterfell was in an all-out. So from just like a political standpoint,
And
Winterfell is at odds with the crown, right?
at that point, though, Winterfell is about to be controlled by the Boltons.
Yeah, but they're not aware of that. They're not aware of the red
I don't know.
wedding. So I'm just thinking that with Winterfell at odds with the crown, you would think that with Marjorie taking over as queen, and then if you were to say, look, we put
But
Sansa with.
the purple wedding takes place after the red wedding.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yes, quite.
Now maybe the plan was maybe the plan wasn't, and maybe it's one of the reasons the Tyrells aren't there in this chapter, right? When Sansa, walks in, she's looking for him and she can't see him. Maybe their plan is to is by not being there, they can say, we didn't know about this. And they can still keep playing Sansa. Maybe they don't.
Well,
to be fair, maybe they actually don't know that this, and Tywin does it underneath them. But
I think Tywin
that's not the way
100%
it
is
seems.
playing the Game of Thrones here. I think he is taking it from the Tyrells, and I think it pisses him off. Because here's the thing.
Do the Tyrells know about this?
About this,
I guess
they found out eventually, but this is Tywin undercutting the Tyrells because he found out that they were planning on marrying her off right into their family. So then he marries Tyrion, which Tyrion needs to be married anyways, and then that gives him Winterfell.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it like this: even if Joffrey dies, and then you have Tommen and you have Marjorie together, if the North is aligned with the Lannister lineage with Tyrion, if there were ever a dispute between the Tyrells and the Lannisters literally just have a massive army in the North that can come down that are, call the banners. So I think it's still a political play by Tywin to marry Tyrion to Sansa. And I think it's a direct competition with the Tyrells, which is hilarious because Marjorie's going to marry Joffrey. So you would think that these families, it just shows how messy this whole thing is. Like they should be in unison and on each other's teams, when in reality, Tywin's scheming and so is Olenna Tyrell. Two of the old heads just going at it. It's kind of awesome, actually.
Yeah. Let me pull up another thing here too, because this will tie into it. So from the chapter here, so this is where Sansa finds out she's not marrying Willis. So you're prettier with your mouth closed, Sansa, Cersei told her. Come along now, the Septon is waiting, and the wedding guests as well. No, Sansa blurted. No. Which, by the way, Sansa flat out tells the Queen, Cersei Lannister, no. Like, that's one line from this whole thing that really never gets talked about. But I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, flat out no. I mean, of course, it doesn't go that direction, but like that one little line there is huge in her character development. So continuing on, yes, you're ward of the crown. The king stands in your father's place since your brother is an attainted traitor. That means he has every right to dispose of your hand. You are to marry my brother Tyrion. My claim, she thought, sickened. Dantas the Fool was not so foolish after all. He had seen the truth of it. Sansa backed away from the queen. I won't. I'm to marry Willis. I'm to be the lady of Highgarden. Please. Now, this is where she, falls back into the girl. I understand your reluctance. Cry if you must. In your place, I would likely rip my hair out. He's a loathsome little imp, no doubt of it, but you marry him, you shall. And so you can't make me. Of course we can. You may come along quietly and say your vows as if it's a lady, or you may struggle and scream and make a spectacle for the stable boys to argue over, but you will end up wedded and bedded all the same. The queen opened the door. Sir Meryn Trant and Sir Osmond Kettleblack were waiting without in the white scale armor of the Kingsguard. Escort Lady Sansa to the Sept, she told them. Carry her if you must, but try not to tear the gown. It was very costly. Sansa tries to run, but Cersei's handmaiden caught her before she'd gone a yard.
So this is why Cersei sucks. I'm going to tell you, this is why she sucks.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying she doesn't.
No, I know, but I'm just, even independent of our conversation prior, Cersei is so detestable to me, and she is tragic in her own way. There is sympathy to be had for Cersei, I think. However, Cersei being put in a position because she's a woman in this patriarchy and being forced to marry Robert Baratheon and being in this horrible relationship, and now her dad's telling her that she's going to have to remarry, and she refuses. You can't make me. And whenever she is then in that seat of power, she does the exact same thing to Sansa. Like, what? Like, I suffered this way, so now you must as well. While also on the other side of the door with Tywin saying that she's not going to do this again. And it's just like, it's so consistent with human history that when someone gets in power, they then do the oppressing that was done upon them prior. Like it's a rite of passage or something. Like it's a passing of the torch. Now you get to be the oppressor. I don't know why, but it infuriates me. Well, I know why it infuriates me because it happens all the time in the real world. Humans do very poorly with power. And Cersei is the embodiment of that. And we see it way more in Feast for Crows, right? She just loses her
when she's in power. Yeah.
She's a hot mess. But man, seeing her do to Sansa what has been done to her. And just a few chapters ago, her yelling at Tywin that she would not remarry. It's just disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So continuing on here, we'll pull this up here too. So Cersei continues here, and she says, "Do as you're told, sweetling. It won't be so bad. Wolves are supposed to be brave, aren't they?"
Oh,
Brave. Sansa took a deep breath. I'm a Stark. Yes, I can be brave. They were all looking at her the way they had looked at her the day in the yard when Sir Boris Blunt had torn her clothes off. It had been the imp who saved her from a beating that day, the same man who was waiting for her now. He's not as bad as the rest of them, she told herself. I'll go. Which is like, man, and there's another moment that like I would love the like the op George needs to finish so he can rewrite the books, but in the other person's point of view. Because I would just love
yeah.
like what would is like Tyrion thinking the same thing, like here I stood that one time trying to save her, and because that also is an interesting decision too, that they decide to marry Tyrion to Sansa,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that Jaime's doesn't necessarily get kicked out of the Kingsguard, but they kind of toss around the idea of letting
Yep.
him marry in the Kingsguard and everything. So why not actually marry Jaime to Sansa? That seems to me like it would have been but of course, Cersei would freak out, but that would have been an interesting route to go, because now you're already kind of disgracing the Starks because they're
Mm-hmm.
traitors, and you're calling them traitors and everything. And you said Sansa's not fit to marry Joffrey. Um, and now you're going to marry Tyrion, the imp, the one who everyone looks down on in the realm, to Winterfell to help like get the claim to Winterfell. It seems like you would want that to be like a stronger claim that people can rally behind, but now you have like the imp who people don't like, and a traitor in
Well,
Sansa.
it's disgracing the North on purpose. They still have claim on it, but like, look at how the North has fallen. The Starks, now are ran by a traitor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And also they get the point and say, look how gracious we are.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, look how accepting we are of this dwarf, and also how accepting we are. We're wonderful people. It's actually almost a theatrical display of mercy after the heinous execution of Ned Stark. That definitely damaged them in the realm, I think. So, this is classical political maneuvering from the Lannisters. Just, oh man.
Yeah. Well, here we go. Continuing on here, this is another Sansa kind of standing up for herself moment here, where Joffrey is standing there. Joffrey was waiting for her on the steps of the castle step. The king was in crimson and gold, his crown on his head. "I'm your father today," he announced. "No, you're not," she flared. "You'll never be." His face darkened. "I am. I'm your father, and I can marry you to whoever you like, to anyone. You'll marry the pig boy if I say so, and bed down with him in the sty." His green eyes glittered with amusement. "Or maybe I should give you to Ilan Payne. Would you like him better?" And then, she backs down again. "Please, your grace," she begged. "If you ever love me even a little bit, don't make me marry your uncle." Tyrion Lannister stepped through the door of the step. "Your grace," he said to Joffrey, "grant me a moment alone with Lady Sansa, if you would be so kind." So, then Tyrion, he has the gash across his face. "You are very beautiful, Sansa," he told her. Tyrion is actually very good to Sansa for the short little time that they are
Yeah.
married. I mean, for
He
sort of
has
the
some
most
creepy
part.
thoughts. He has some.
Well, I mean, he does marry her, and the way things work in this world, he kind of it's I mean, it
Well,
is
there's a
it
huge
is
reason for this, and it's the direct contrast of Tyrion and Penny.
Penny. Oh, the
The door,
the
and also not just Tyrion and Penny, but Tyrion in the prostitute in book 5, where
mhm.
she is clearly not engaged with what's going on, and he continues to do it. Where here he shows restraint, even though he has temptations. He restrains himself here. Later on, his character has fallen quite far, and he, I would say, goes with someone who's very unwilling. And that is a direct contrast from Tyrion that we see pre A Storm of Swords ending and post A Storm of Swords ending. And it seems like Tyrion is becoming a villain, later in the series. So we're seeing him at maybe his most heroic, from Blackwater to now, showing that he has restraint until obviously the trial.
He does also threaten the king, so there's not a little bit of restraint there with a knife on the, with a knife on the table.
Pretty
here.
awesome.
Yeah. There's a moment though here, right here. So the bride's cloak he held was huge and heavy, crimson velvet, richly worked with lions and gold. No one had thought to bring a stool, however, and Tyrion stood a half a foot shorter than his bride. As he moved behind her, Sansa felt a sharp tug on her skirt. He wants me to kneel, she realized, blushing. She was mortified. It was not supposed to be this way. She had dreamt of her wedding, 1,000 times. All of these things, she's like a kiss and all of these things. She felt another tug on her skirt, more insistent. I won't. Why should I spare his feelings when no one cares about mine? He tugs a third time stubbornly. She pressed her lips together and pretended not to notice, but she doesn't kneel.
Dude, this is a brutal
that's also, I mean, that's a big moment for her too, is that she refuses to kneel.
It's not only a big moment there, but it's also brutal for Tyrion because he is embarrassed as well. I mean, this is awful. And these are the little details. Like, people talk about like a lot of the abuse in A Song of Ice and Fire and the violence and the death, but I have found always some of the hardest hitting moments, aside from the Red Wedding, that these little deaths that we're dying with these characters are way worse. I mean, could you imagine how embarrassed both feel at the moment? They're trying to hang on to any semblance of pride they may have. Tyrion doesn't want to force her down. He's asking her by tugging. He's saying, please come down. Will you please get down here so I don't look so ridiculous? And she's thinking, I refuse, because that's the last line of self, confidence that I have. It's just, George is so good at this stuff. He's also amazing at destroying expectations. Obviously, Sansa has imagined her wedding as she imagined knights and kings and princes and traveling to the capital, all being destroyed from this POV. Also, on top of this, we see the Tyrells and what they think is going to happen with Joffrey. And Loras is going to protect me and this and that. And how does any of those expectations go for these characters? It doesn't work out at all, does it? To the point where having to poison Joffrey. This is the best parts of A Song of Ice and Fire, or maybe I should say the hardest hitting.
Yeah, there's as we continue on just a little bit here. So this is when they start dancing. Tyrion's like, I think we've already given them enough, amusement for the day. As you say, my lord. She pulled her hand back. Joffrey and Marjorie led in their place. How can a monster dance so beautifully? Sansa wondered. She's watching Joffrey and Marjorie dance, and it kind of gave me a little like Beauty and the Beast imagery.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, definitely.
Is that it's Joffrey and Marjorie who are both, beautiful, I guess, to the realm. And then here you have like Sansa and Tyrion, who the realm could look both at beasts, right? Tyrion obviously is the imp, and his nose has been cut. And then of course, Sansa they view as a traitor and all of those things. So it's kind of giving me like a little bit of that. She looks at all this stuff and she thinks in her dreams they'd all been smiling. Not even my husband is smiling. So
yeah. I mean, fantasy has always pulled a lot from fairy tales, myths, all these things. And George is of no exception. I think he plays with Prince Charming quite a bit with Rhaegar. And then you have these kind of things with Beauty and the Beast, which is actually explored multiple times through Sansa, because you also have Sansa and the Hound as well. And fun fact, which I've probably said a million times here on the podcast, George worked on Beauty and the Beast back in the day. And he worked on it with the narrator of the Song of Ice and Fire books, Roy Detrice. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it is Detrice. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll just call him a good old Roy. Rest in peace.
Well, he struggles pronouncing things to say correctly in all the audiobooks.
Hey, man, he's dead. Show some respect, would you?
Well, I'm just saying.
Okay, my God.
He's also a pyromancer in the.
He is a pyromancer
in the Game of Thrones show.
So George is very in tune with Beauty and the Beast. He has probably thought about it from different angles, and without a doubt, this is, a play on that.
Yeah. So I'll just continue on here a little bit here. So as this is going on, Sansa sits with her hands in her lap, watching, the queen moving. She charms them all. How I hate her. She looks to where Moon Boy is dancing with Dantos. Again, Moon Boy, you want to follow the Moon Boy trend, Moon Boy Cersei trend. Moon Boy is mentioned almost every time. It is always immediately following Cersei.
That's so
Just
ridiculous.
it's always in proximity of Cersei.
What
I'm
are you
just
suggesting, sir?
I think Osmond Kettle Black and he probably even Moon Boy too.
You think Moon Boy clapped them cheeks?
I do.
That is preposterous, my friend.
Well,
Hey, that's the queen.
Lancel who shooks up with her cousin.
Yeah, but at least he's knightly, kind of, right?
Not
Moon
like
Boy? Come
we
on.
don't know, man.
Come
We
on.
don't. So, anyway, Tyrion says, my lady can dance with whoever she pleases. Perhaps she ought to have remained beside her husband, but she wanted to dance so badly. And Sir Garland was brother to Marjorie, to Willis, the Knight of Flowers. I see why you name him Sir Garland the Gallant. So she's looking at all these other people she'd rather be with, and Tyrion keeps saying things, like my lady wife is this, and all of these things. So it kind of continues on a little bit here, and I want to get to really where things kind of take a turn for the worse,
As they
right?
usually do.
Yeah. So here we go. So basically then the dance brought her face to face with Joffrey. Sansa stiffened as his hand touched hers, but the king tightly tightened his grip and drew her closer. You shouldn't look so sad. My uncle is an ugly little thing, but you'll still have me. You're to marry Marjorie. A king can have other women, whores. My father did. One of the Aegons did too, the third or the fourth. He had lots of them. And then the world, as they whirled to the music, Joffrey gave her a kiss. My uncle will bring you to my bed whenever I command it. Sansa shakes her head. He won't. He will, or I'll have his head. So that it kind of continues on just a little bit here. His relief was short-lived. No sooner had the music died than she heard Joffrey say, "It's time to bed them. Let's get the clothes off her and have a look at what the she-wolf's got to give my uncle." She says, "I'll have no bedding. You will if I command it." The imp slammed his dagger down in the table where it stood quivering. "Then you'll serve your own bride with a wooden prick. I'll geld you, I swear it."
Let's go.
Yeah.
Tyrion
Might be her
heroic
true knight in
moments.
shining armor. Bigger than he seems.
Now, remember, this is the person that she had just dishonored. No, I shouldn't say dishonored, but kind of disrespected by not taking the knee, right?
Right.
How do you think that makes Sansa feel? Being who she is. This is a person who basically just said he'll cut off the king's manhood in her name. I mean, crazy.
Yeah. And then Tywin stands up immediately. "I believe we can dispense with the bedding, Tyrion. I'm certain you did not mean to threaten the king's royal person." I misspoke. He said it was a bad jape. And then literally, this is another one of these power plays too, where really you can, while it doesn't show it, obviously the scene in the show, because you can see the thing. Everybody really kind of looks to Tywin to see like what he thinks. And of course, it's so good in the show. I mean, Charles Dance as Tywin Lannister has to be. Is it the best casting of the entire show?
Yes, but
I mean, there's so many, right?
I'm partial to Mark Addy, clearly.
Right. I mean, there's so many that are great, but I mean, wow, it's so good. Yeah, it's so good. Of course. So, it continues on here. "My son is drunk. You can see that. I am," he confessed, "but not so drunk that I can attend to my own bedding. Come with me, my wife. Time to smash your portcullis. I want to play Come into the Castle." And he's trying to, make up for it by, "Oh, I'm the imp. I'm stupid. I'm drunk." Which does work, right? Obviously, this scene does kind of, working out for they get out of that situation. Then they go upstairs and it's sort of incredibly awkward. Obviously Sansa is scared and frightened, and Tyrion's kind of like, what do I do? Kind of thing. And he just drinks. And it ultimately ends with Tyrion. I mean, she tells him the story of Tysha a little bit. He doesn't go into the full details of it, but certainly mentions her name. And maybe that is why Tyrion actually says you never have to do it, because he certainly could have been like, "No, we're gonna do it."
Yes,
but is
also,
it bringing up Tysha maybe that causes Tyrion to actually just
their common thread between them is that they have both been victimized by the Lannister family. Tyrion happens to be a part of that family, but he has been victimized by his father. Sansa has been victimized in many, many different ways. But there's a whole third part of this that we haven't really talked about, and that's that Shay is upset about this.
Yeah, that's true.
She's there. She's going to be the handmaiden for Sansa. There's all this. And Tyrion is also weighing that. My question would be, would Tyrion have been restrained and done this and not done this had Shay not been in the picture?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think part of it is the fact that he did almost just threaten to kill Joffrey. And so he's still like very upset with his family.
Yeah.
If they had been married, if they had been married by Tywin while Tyrion was still Hand of the King and not like betrayed and had his nose cut off and things like that, maybe it would have been, certainly before, like if this had happened before like a Game of Thrones essentially started and all hell broke loose, that certainly would have been a different scenario for Tyrion. But I think it's like it's the right positioning at the right time for Sansa that Tyrion is where he is, emotionally and mentally.
Yeah.
So, ultimately we know what ends up happening is, Tyrion does kind of tell, he's like, hey, he's like, when the lights are off, I'm like the Knight of the Flowers. Okay. So he does still kind of throw it out there to say, because, they probably both think we're about to be married forever.
Yeah. And it's a terrible feeling to not, the person that's married to you clearly doesn't want to be married to you. And you're in this awkward position where you're expected to do this. The whole thing's awkward.
The whole thing is awkward, and then ultimately he ends up, not doing it right. And if I never want you to touch my lord, his mouth jerked as if she had slapped him. Never. Why? That's why the god made whores for imps like me. He closed his short, blunt fingers into a fist and climbed down off the bed. So obviously he is upset by the situation, because he's probably never been in that situation. I don't know. It's the whole thing is awkward. But the crazy part about it, and it's actually one of the things I liked a little bit about season 8, is that when like Sansa and Tyrion get like kind of see each other again and they're in the crypt, is that Sansa and Tyrion, like, for as a marriage alliance, not romantically, but would make one of the best power couples in all of Westeros.
By the end. Yeah, by the end.
By the end, they would be like an absolute force to be reckoned with, because they would be able to like politically maneuver any scenario.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? It's like, in this world, it's more favorable probably to marry for power than it is love.
Right.
But they're kind of the opposite of that, right?
So we know Sansa would be fine with Tyrion whoring around, as long,
Are we?
Certainly, I think so, because then he wouldn't touch her. But do you think Tyrion would be fine with Sansa sleeping with other people?
I don't know. Are we pondering whether they're swingers or not? Is that what we're doing?
No, I guess what I'm saying is it possible their marriage could, like, in a non, crazy,
just for the power
apocalyptic war coming, could they have made it work?
I don't think Tyrion can do it. I think Tyrion wants to be loved and be with the person he loves. I think Tyrion struggles greatly with this with Shay. Look at what he's. If you were to talk about someone being stupid,
do you think they could have made an arrangement where they said, like, politically we'll be together, but we'll sleep with whoever we want?
I think Tyrion wants, just like Jaime and Cersei also, a lot of the romance in this series are people hiding their true feelings and just dying to make it known. Ned Stark, for most likely what was Ashara Dane, comes to mind. Robb Stark actually picks love over power and dies for it. Right. You see what I mean? So I think Tyrion is at times maybe even a hero because he is taking these, what you could consider to be pretty boneheaded risks for Shay, who ends up tearing his heart out of his chest, right? But I think he wouldn't be doing all these dumb things to hide Shay if he didn't ultimately just want to be with her alone,
Yeah. So, again, this is something I talked about at the beginning, and I brought up a couple of times, is I would just love to see this chapter through Tyrion's eyes.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, I think we do. He does a good job of. George does a great job of giving, like, you can see obviously the anger in Tyrion's eyes. You can tell he's,
Yeah.
he's embarrassed when he is and stuff like that. But it's just one of those POVs that, like most POVs, you never really need the other person's point of view. But man, this is just one of those Tyrion ones that would just be so interesting to see it from his perspective. Because also think about, like, there's so much you could do with, like, Shay, like
Yeah.
Tyrion being married, and I'm sure Shay is in attendance. It's not mentioned, but I'm sure she's there.
Yeah, I feel as if this is one of the reasons why George has a really tough time writing these books, because so many POVs intertwine, and then he probably writes. I imagine George writes them from both POVs and then decides which one's the better one to go with. On the flip side of this, I think it's so impressive what we can extrapolate from Tyrion's reactions in this scenario, and that is a big way of doing show not tell. He is showing Tyrion's feelings through his outrage, his outburst, the way he drops his face. That is the hallmark of a pretty good writer, in my opinion. That if you told me about this chapter and you didn't tell me what POV it was from and how much information we got from Tyrion here, from him showing us through Sansa's eyes, I would wonder who was the POV. Was it Sansa or Tyrion? So in some ways, even though we don't have the Tyrion POV, I think he did a great job of rounding it out for us to be able to kind of draw conclusions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Well, hey, that is our chapter for this week. So, with that, we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. Our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, Arya 5.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We'll see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.